Hello, everyone. We would like to welcome you once again to our podcast with a feature and a hope counseling. It's good to be with you again. Tad Bodman is here with me. Rich Cozart is my name. We have been talking about the horsemen of the apocalypse. And of course, that's a conception from John Gottman, who's a specialist in marriage and family. So I'm going to turn it over to Tad just to give us some few introductory remarks. As I said, we've already talked a bit about this in our first couple of sessions together. So Tad, where are we headed on this?
Yeah, well, good to be here again with you, Rich, and everybody watching. The four horsemen of the apocalypse that Gottman talks about are these four really toxic behaviors to relationships. All relationships, really. His research has really been in the area of marriages and intimate relationships. And last week we talked about the first one, criticism. That act of coming to your spouse with statements like "you always," "you never," where it's really a way of telling your spouse they're wrong and you don't appreciate it. We talked a little bit about last week about the antidote, and that's to pause and get really clear. What are you really feeling? What do you want? And then come to your spouse and phrase it that way. Tell them what emotions you're experiencing and respond and let them know what is the behavior that you're wanting, or what's the experience that you want from them. Well, we're talking about defensiveness today because it's, in many ways, Rich, it's the natural response to criticism, right? If somebody comes to us and tells us, you always do this, you never do that. Well, in many ways, that's obviously untrue, right? I mean, very few of us always do anything or never do something in response to the same situation. Unfortunately, we struggle mightily as flawed human beings to be that consistent. But it's this response that's really natural. And so I think it's a really important topic for us to talk about today, and in this continuing process of talking about these four toxic behaviors. So today's is the second one, the topic of defensiveness.
Well, I'm very interested in that, Tad, and of course I encounter it quite a bit in my counseling, and of course in my own life as well. So I'm interested first. You explained what criticism was last time. So explain some more for us. What is it? What is defensiveness?
Yeah, thanks. At its essence, Rich, it's a counterattack, right? If somebody comes to me and says, you never wash the dishes, a defensive response in its essence is a counterattack. It's a way to say, I've been really busy and you don't help out around here, right? So it's a way of kind of creating an excuse for my behavior, but then turning it and into an attack on my spouse or my family member in a way that escalates the conflict rather than de-escalates it, right? There's really three facets to defensiveness. That's the first one, this concept of counterattack. The second facet can come in this form of righteous indignation, right? And this is kind of a sneaky form of defensiveness where, it's this idea that, why is it for me to have to do the dishes, right? I I do so much around here, right? Why, it's just not even, doesn't make any sense at all why you would expect me to do this, right?
Mm.
So it's this way also of turning it around and implying that your spouse is really off base in their expectation or their desire right now, right? And the third one is this victimhood approach, right? Where you turn it into that your spouse is bringing you a complaint, a request, and you turn it into a statement where, in essence, you're asking them to comfort you, right? Something's happened where they're hurt, they're frustrated, they're afraid, they're angry, and you turn it around so that instead of you understanding and comforting them, you phrase it as if you're the victim, right? Why are you accusing me? All the things I do around here, I can never do enough for you, right? And it's this posture that you take to shift the responsibility in all three of these approaches, shifting the responsibility off of yourself and onto your spouse or somebody or something else.
Well, I hear you saying that with this defensiveness, we're playing the victim, we're blaming others, we're not taking responsibility.
Right.
And so my question now is, why? Why is it engage in defensiveness?
It's a really great question. And there's really three aspects of it, I think, that really is the underlying motivation for defensive responses, right? And they often go together. The first one is it seems protective of us, right? If I counterattack and I put the blame on somebody else or something else, it feels like it's protecting me from having to experience my spouse's displeasure with me. I don't have to be the one that did something wrong, right? And so it feels protective. It's not true. It ultimately escalates the conflict and creates more separation relationally. But in the moment, there's often this feeling of it feeling protective, and often as we're growing up in our families of origin, right, we learn some of these responses, and perhaps we've had legitimate experiences where, somebody's criticism or complaint really wasn't safe for us, and there wasn't a place to respond appropriately, and this defensive response, this counterattack, counter blaming, really was experienced as protective.
Mm.
Second facet of, it's kind of what's underneath this response, I think, is a sense of insecurity. This sense, this experience that for me to have done something wrong, for somebody to be upset at me, it feels so intolerable because it's poking on some things that I believe about myself, right? My wife comes and tells me, you never do the dishes. I may have this internal negative dialogue with myself that's been going on for years that says, you're always so lazy, right? And so often there's these roots of personal insecurity that play a role in this. And then the third piece that sort of comes together with either this protective motivation or this base insecurity, and that's that when we feel criticized, when we are engaging with somebody who's unhappy with us, often we haven't done the work to be able to maintain a sense of genuine curiosity about our spouse.
Mm.
And it's this lack of curiosity that it really forms the defensive behavior, right? If I'm listening to my wife only to form my rebuttal, only to form my defense and why she's actually the problem and not me, right? I'm not holding this stance of curiosity to really want to understand, well, what does doing the dishes mean to her, right? What is it about that matters to her, and what is she really asking me? And instead, I'm attacking back, right? So it's really those three things that it appears protective. We have this sense of insecurity, and those two combine to create this lack of curiosity to really want to listen and understand our spouse.
That's a really good way of putting it. And I especially, like this idea of thinking that it's somehow going to fix the problem or put a Band-Aid on the problem, and it gives us some immediate sense of relief, but it's in the long run very counterproductive and isn't really getting to the root of the problem. So it may seem fine for maybe a few seconds or minutes, but beyond that, it's really not the cure that we're looking for.
Right.
Very good. Well, Tad, what do we do about our defensiveness? How can we handle this in a way that is going to help us going forward?
Yeah, because just knowing it's not very helpful isn't very helpful in and of itself, right? As it turns out, Rich, and you, I know you experienced this as well in our work with marriage counseling. Our marriages are made up of these patterns of interaction where we and our wives, our spouses, we're involved in a dance that each of us is participating in, right? In any conflict, in any concern, it's exceedingly rare that only one spouse is involved in the problem, right? We're often, dancing together either to create or form the foundation for the problem to come to be. And often we're even involved in the problem together, right? So the antidote to defensiveness, even if your spouse comes to you with criticism, the antidote is to take responsibility, to accept responsibility for whatever part of it you can identify and understand first, right? And really respond in a way that wants to understand what is your spouse asking from you. And then accept the responsibility, be accountable, be willing to experience the discomfort of having frustrated, hurt, angered your spouse in some way, right? Be willing to tolerate that discomfort and come to them with a response that accepts your role in it. And this second part's really important. Without demanding that your spouse accepts their part, right? In our work with couples, I often explain to them that marriage counseling never works if what we're focused on is fixing our spouse's behavior, because we simply can't change other people. We can't control them. But every marriage can be saved and healed and restored if the husband and the wife each individually takes their own personal responsibility for changing their thoughts and their behaviors, right? One of the last things I want to leave everybody with is this idea, we're really talking about this as behaviors, conversations, communication, right? These four horsemen, these four toxic behaviors, they start as toxic thoughts, right? Our critical words start as critical thoughts. Our defensive responses start with defensive thinking, right? And so it's really important to think about these four toxic behaviors as we continue to go through them, not just as communication skills, but as a tool to really honor God's calling for us to take every thought captive, right? Yes.
I think what you're saying to us, you're calling us to a certain level of mindfulness. We think about our behaviors and our words and our actions before we actually do them, especially when it comes to these matters of defensiveness. So if we can catch the thought and correct the thought, we have a greater likelihood of correcting the behavior and perhaps even avoiding saying something that's going to cause more damage in our relationship.
Right.
Yeah, I hear you about mindfulness, humility, taking thoughts captive, being responsible for those things for which we can be responsible. And then leaving the rest to God and perhaps our spouse, but do it.
Exactly. And next week we're going to talk about the most toxic behavior of the four, and that's contempt. So looking forward to next week's session. And invite everybody to come back because this idea of contempt is so corrosive, not just to marriages, but to all of our relationships. And I think we're seeing a culture of contempt all around us in our world today. So I really want to invite people to come back and listen next week to the third of Gottman's Four Horsemen.
I can't wait, Tad, for that. And in the meantime, we just want to remind you that if you do need counseling or someone close to you does, or an acquaintance, feel free to get in touch with us at a Future and a Hope Ministries counseling. We would love to talk things over with you. And until then, we hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.